My friends, we are going to grow and get better together. This is not about me. This is about us. Welcome to Win Today with Johnny Martin. Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Win Today with your boy, Johnny Martin. I am super excited to have a guest with us today on the phone from Charlotte, North Carolina. Just a little bit of a backstory about how this gentleman and I got connected. A couple weeks ago, I did a call to action through social media, and you talk about how small the world is. I did a call to action through social media asking if the folks that follow me through my various forms of social media had anybody that they thought would be a great guest on the show. And, you know, I expected to get some feedback, and I did, but one of the things that I didn't expect was to get some feedback relative to a two-time Olympic swimmer that also happens to be educated at the same college that I was, in Springfield College. So you talk about how small the world is. I am super excited to have with us today, now residing in Charlotte, North Carolina, originally from Bermuda, two-time Olympian, set Bermuda records in the 50 and 100 free in the 2011 World Championships, competed in the 2008 and 2012 Olympics. Currently works and lives in Charlotte as a swim coach. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend Roy Burch. What's happening, Roy?
Hey, how you doing? Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, man. We are honored to have you on the show. And I think, you know, just in looking at your story after I kind of found out about you and was certainly familiar with you from Springfield College, although you're a little bit younger than I am, just looking at your story, what an amazing journey, man, from Bermuda to the States to college to the Olympics. Something else, huh?
Yeah, thank you. It's definitely been, good to me in many ways. But, just like anything else, it has its ups and downs. But the ups have definitely been something to remember.
I could only imagine, and we'll get into that as we talk about sort of your Olympic journey. But talk to us a little bit about life growing up in Bermuda, and when did you know that swimming was truly a passion for you and something that you found out pretty early on that you were going to be pretty good at?
Well, Bermuda being so small, it creates a kind of early competitive nature, I believe. You have the opportunity to compete with a whole country most of the time. So we tend to get very good early development out of our athletes, and the running scene in Bermuda was tough. I mean, these kids are fast, and doing other sports, multi-sports growing up, I just ended up doing well at swimming above the other people, and that just drove me to want to push myself. A door opened where I was doing a bit better than everyone else naturally, so something in me was compelled to move toward that.
That's pretty. One of the points you brought up a couple minutes ago. That's a really interesting perspective that I never thought of, especially as we look at recruiting across multiple sports in the States. Is that you mentioned being able to compete on a national level, even as a young kid, and that really draws a lot of natural competition out of folks, being that the island was so small. So what I'm imagining is that. Whereas in the Northeast or in larger demographics across the country, these kids that are told that they're really good athletes maybe are only competing against young men and women from, within 90 or 100 miles of them, but you're literally competing against young men of your age from across an entire nation. So that's a really, really interesting point.
Yes, and the island it's so small, but there's still that kind of cultivation of a high-end athlete in the small area. So you end up you get the best of the island's ability, which I find can compete at a high level with other nations at a younger age. I mean, there's a difficulty in that transition, which I'm sure we'll get into later, but at a younger age, we have very, very tough competition, and you have to be able to compete fairly well and be very strong when you're young.
What are the big sports on the island, George? Is it you mentioned running? What else is a big sport on the island?
Well, the national sport is football and cricket, but there are difficulties in producing a team um, with such a small population. When we have kind of the top tier Olympic sports would be with triathlon at this point, as we have Flora Duffy, who is number one in the world currently and has been world champion for the past few years in the international triathlon scene.
Wow.
But also the swim scene and the track scene has probably been the most competitive, and definitely the track scene has been highly competitive through the 90s. So in my mind, those are the most popular sports on or the most competitive sports on the island. But we also have great sailors. I definitely can't leave them out. The sailing abilities, due to the island being, obviously it's an island, so
sure, yeah,
on the water.
Plenty of water.
And, yeah, and good crosswinds and things that they need. So there's also a great scene for that.
That's really cool. Tell me about some of the early success you had in swimming. Like, is the schooling set up similar to the way it is in the States, where you have elementary school, middle school, and then secondary school? And tell me about the early success you had maybe in middle school and high school in swimming.
Well, our school system was different when I began, but by the time I got to about fifth grade, it had changed to the middle school system. I think much like how I don't know if it was always like that here, but we didn't always have that. We had primary and secondary, but so there really wasn't a team. I didn't have a school team where I was growing up for my first 6 years. I swam club the whole time. So and then even in middle school, there really wasn't a team until high school, where we would compete against a few other high schools that were there, but it really wasn't a big scene there in terms of being a well-known swimmer, I guess, coming out of the school. Now, people in the school, everyone knew all the other swimmers. I mean, there was not like we'd come to these meets and not know each other.
Sure, it's like anything else. You know who your competition is.
Exactly. So most of the competition came from when we would work for the opportunity to compete internationally. So we could do that at a very young age. My first international competition was when I was 9 years old, and I went to Toms River, New Jersey. I mean, is it international? I just mean traveling, I guess. No,
but that's crazy.
Yeah.
When you think about, a lot of people in across sports to travel internationally to compete. So much of that doesn't happen until much later on, and you had your first international competition at 9 years old.
Yeah, and it changed. It changes everything. We were hosted, and I stayed with a family that I had no idea about, and learned all these things about American culture, and it just changed my perspective of what I was seeing growing up on an island. So everything I was seeing was just from TV. And,
of course.
You can't. That's just no way to go, no perspective to work off of. So once I was able to get into the culture and be in someone's house and learn about things that they did in this area, everything changed.
What an amazing blessing, I'm sure, though, Roy, as you look back, right, to be able to have those experiences just outside of swimming, but to learn about life at such a young age. And I'm sure to some degree, not just around your training for swimming, but to some degree probably shaped some of your goals and planning for the future.
Yeah, it definitely made some changes in how I approached situations due to the experiences I had. It mainly just opened up space for all kinds of people. I don't know how much it necessarily played into my further success as an athlete. Obviously, it had a lot to do with it, but ultimately taking it into life experience, it really just allowed me to open up myself to get to know people better.
Sure. And different types of people, right?
Yes, for sure.
So how do you go from how does Roy Burch go from being a successful swimmer on the island of Bermuda and finding Springfield College of about 2,500 undergrads in Springfield, Mass. Take us along that journey.
That was a bit of a whirlwind. When I was a senior, my mother passed away. When I was a senior in high school, so she had been battling cancer for about 10 years, and she had called me at the beginning, like probably about 3 weeks into my senior year, told me that there was nothing left that could be done. And so when she had died, obviously I was devastated, and she was really she was guiding the process of how I went through school and things like that. So I was actually in a prep school in New Jersey, the Petty School at the time when she had passed, trying to develop my career to go to a Division I institution.
Sure.
And
so just so the listeners understand, and just so I'm clear, so you were at this point in time, you were now in the States going to prep school, and Mom was helping guide your journey from Bermuda.
Yeah, sorry. So
that's okay.
I was sent to prep school in order to, first of all, get my academics better. So it was a lot to get me in there because academically I wasn't that strong, and Bermuda, where I was in Bermuda, wasn't. I wasn't keeping myself up to the tier that I needed to be at.
Understood.
I'm not going to blame anybody else for that.
Sure.
I didn't keep myself up to a higher tier, but my swimming had me at a higher tier. So I was fourth All-American as a senior. And while I was getting ready, I didn't understand the process of the recruiting, all these things, and didn't ask for help. A whole lot of things that I've had to work out at this point in my life. Anyway, I didn't end up being able to use my schooling at prep school because I had already been considered a graduate coming out of Bermuda. So I wasn't able to pass the clearinghouse, although I did have the swimming credentials or the swimming resume to be at Division I. And I tried to swim at Arizona State. I was going to get like a 4th spot on a relay right away. And they had the nice business school there.
Sure.
And that was supposed to be the path, but not having the academic background that I needed, that just didn't work out. And I wasn't in school. I didn't get into Springfield until July, where the college counselor had just made some calls to different places that would take me. And the options were something like University of South Dakota, I think, Clarion, and Springfield College. And I had never even been to Massachusetts, I don't think. And
wow.
I basically chose it off of knowing about the city of Boston.
Sure.
And that was it.
Which is about 90 miles from Alden Street. So.
Yeah. And I mean, I did. Yeah. On top of that, there was the knowledge. I mean, I just had no understanding. It was really, really a strange process. I mean,
and I think it really speaks to, try to put myself back there, put myself in the shoes of Roy Burch as a prep kid in New Jersey, where you probably are under the notion that because you've been so successful in the pool, not having a great understanding of the NCAA rules and the clearinghouse and the core requirements, that you're thinking something's going to work out for you. Added to that, the tragic passing of your mom, being away from home, that's a lot to deal with for anybody, certainly a kid who's 17 or 18 years old. So it's just, I think it really speaks to, all of us have this idea that we have this plan and this is how this plan is supposed to go. But oftentimes life throws some obstacles in our way that we at the time maybe don't want to navigate or aren't prepared to navigate, but they help us write our story. So, and it sounds to me like the same has been the case for you. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, it's interesting hearing it said back, because it just was a difficult time. I mean, you're thinking about just trying to get to college, and then it's like the person who was very instrumental in understanding that process was no longer there, and it's just kind of like you dropped out of the sky to understand all these things that I didn't even know where to begin. I mean, I just didn't use my resources properly, but I was not clear in my thought. I had no time to mourn. And so it just kind of, every decision was just a late decision. Like, it was basically like playing a basketball game and just shooting a bunch of bad shots and hoping one goes in.
Sure.
And so, and not even really understanding that you're doing that. So it's hard to think about those times, but it's really like it feels like I was forged or I was pushed in a certain way that this was the route that it was going to be taken, whether or not I had the plan to be somewhere else. And it's like you said there, we make plans, but sometimes, we're pushed in a different direction that is where we need to be headed.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. And, when you talk about that, it's very difficult, for people that are listening or, we try to talk to people all the time on this show about getting through discomfort and the stuff that happens on the other side of the trials, the tribulations, the misfortunes. The stuff that happens on the other side of that is sometimes the most beautiful stuff in the world. And, when you have a chance to reflect back on it, 10, 15, 20 years later is when you realize, man, the reason I've written the story the way I've written it is because all of that stuff occurred. When in the moment, for those of you that are listening, Roy's journey probably very similar to some of yours, maybe not from an athletic perspective, but from a life perspective. When we're going through it in the moment, we feel like it's the end of the world. And we're listening to a guy who, in the course of 1 year, in a completely different country from where he was raised, his mom unfortunately passes away. He finds out he cannot academically swim at the level that he wants to swim at, even though his numbers reflect that he's that good. And so now we're literally turning that page on a blank piece of paper and we're rewriting the story all over again. And that's what, to me, that's what's beautiful about people's journeys is that, man, we just don't know, but you got to just keep pressing forward. And so it kind of takes us into the next piece of this, I think, for you, Roy, which is you end up at Springfield College and you had a phenomenal career there, correct? And then after Springfield began preparing for the Olympic Games. So take us through that before we go to our first break here.
Well, during that time, I was trying to mourn as best as I could, and I just had these like weird lulls. I don't want to call them weird lulls, but I just had so many lulls that made it hard to deal with people in certain situations. So when I got to Springfield, my main decision was to swim as a part of the college team and just do that. I didn't want to compete internationally anymore. I wanted to focus on getting my degree and swimming for the school. And my mind, I was going back home to Bermuda just to work in an insurance company and try to make money, and make as much money as possible,
and make a life for yourself where you were born and raised.
Exactly, and I wasn't thinking about much else outside of that, and so as things started to go, I just had a fairly good freshman year. The school we had won the men's championship in our conference for the first time. The men and women had won, which was great, and things were going well. My national coach had then asked me to try to come back, and so I ended up agreeing to that, and things just started to roll from there. I started to get back into swimming again mentally, where I wanted to do it more often. Still not quite seeing the bigger picture, still not quite looking at the games or anything like that. Just looking at traveling, life experience, staying in shape, and competing, and getting my education.
See, another great example of how you just don't, you got to be able to be fluid enough to roll with the circumstances and the opportunities that life gives you. You go, if I'm hearing you right, you go to Springfield with the intent of, okay, I've just gone through a pretty hellacious year with family situations, the disappointment of not ending up at a D1 school. But now I end up at this little school in Springfield, Mass. We have a real good year from a swimming perspective. My national coach, and I'm assuming you mean your national coach either in the States or back in Bermuda.
In Bermuda, no, he's in Bermuda.
Asked you to come back and train, and now that fire and that spark starts to get reignited, yeah?
Yeah, exactly, and it just takes a little bit, and things were good in some ways, but I was also still a very broken person. I mean, I think swimming just in some way it recreated itself as an anchor or created itself as an anchor. I don't know if it recreated, but it definitely became something where I could look to that I knew I could be consistent. So I looked to that for kind of days of frustration, going in, pound out a workout, days feeling good, going in, pound out a workout.
Sure.
So it was just how early life or not college life of cultivating energy in different ways, moving frustration, irritation, whatever, those dukkers or those bad energy into a way that I could create something from that.
I think that's such a great point and awesome takeaway for people that are listening is that, and I won't frame it as eloquently as you did, but you said, create energy in other ways. So using those emotions that we have that might handicap most of us or prevent us from getting up and facing the day, because I'm sure as you went through this tough year, there were probably plenty of days where it would have been much easier just to stay under the covers and ignore everything that the day had to offer. So that mindset of, well, I have these things going on in my head and in my heart. I'm hurting, I'm frustrated, I'm disappointed, but you know what? I've got to find a way to creatively use this energy in ways that may help me move forward. Even if at the time we don't realize that we're using them in ways that are going to help us move forward and continue to shape our story. That's pretty awesome, man.
Definitely. I think we all do it subconsciously, but it's trying to, at this point in my life, it's trying to bring that to the conscious forefront, like developing that more often than not, which I can look back on those times and draw from that and be like, okay, in some way I was doing these things already, but now I can refine my process.
Yeah, and I think the more reflective we can be, especially as folks that in our life's work, spend our life's work trying to improve the lives of other people, whether as a counselor, a coach, a speaker, in your role as a husband, a father, a swim coach, I think it's priceless to be able to look back on and reflect on those moments so that you can pass those on to your children and also your athletes.
Definitely.
So take us to how you find out that being an Olympic athlete might be a possibility for you.
Well, at the beginning of my junior year, I became a father, and during that time, there was more than enough to think about. So
I would imagine so.
So I was trying to evaluate how was it that I was going to swim, be a parent, swim, and go to school. And so I reduced my schedule, or I changed the way I trained essentially, and tried to make sure that I was getting the best out of myself in each place that I was committed to. And what ended up happening is normally every year we'd go to a training camp somewhere. Usually it was Florida, and we just crush like tens of thousands of meters and swim our brains out. And so this time I didn't go. I ended up not going because I needed to be home and be around to do what needed to be done. So I ended up swimming at a meet early in the January when everybody had come back from this camp, and I swam a pretty decent 50. And my national coach got a hold of that time. Somehow he must have been keeping track of my results. And he ended up going to the committee and creating a new policy for yards times to be a part of the qualification process for world championships. Now, at the time, you could qualify for world championships based off a time from the association of your country.
Okay.
So they felt, or the national coach had felt, that the time I swam in this dual meet competition was good enough to swim at the world championships in 2007. So he then calls me like, yo, you have this time here. We can enter you into world championships. This then makes you eligible to be able to compete at the Olympics the following year.
So world championships in swimming are sort of the proving grounds for those folks that are or may have the opportunity to swim in the Olympic Games. Yes.
Well, for those countries that don't have a trials, so obviously we see USA has trials for everything.
Sure.
The Olympic trials being the biggest, but the numbers are there. Australia has trials, England has trials, a bunch of European countries have trials, but they all have different rules allocated to their trials. The U.S. trials, and I believe the Australian trials, are like the strictest. You got to be first, second.
Sure.
If not, goodbye. You're going home.
Right. And that's just because the competition is so tight, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So it just takes all the politics out of it. This is like, you got to be first or second here today. But for us, it's world championships, or that gives us different kinds of eligibility. So we attend that and to make sure that we can, at least if we're the number one in our country, for most small countries, we can be eligible to compete at the games on an invitational qualification if you don't make the automatic, or be sent as an athlete for your country. Anyway, you can be sent. 2 athletes can be sent per country without qualification.
Gotcha.
But I was made eligible for that at 2007 World Championships, which begun the process to start to look at Beijing and start the Olympic journey.
What an unbelievable start to the Olympic journey. And Beijing was in 2008. Before we wrap part 1 of this episode with Roy, I just kind of want to recap for those of you that hopefully took away some great talking points, specifically from the last few minutes of his presentation, because in this life, we can find a million reasons to complain about why we can't get stuff done. So I just want you to remember that we're listening to a dude right now who his junior year in college, not out of college with a full-time job, his own house, white picket fence in the yard, as a junior in college, found out that he's going to be a dad, subsequently became a dad, is a collegiate level swimmer, and is still finding time to train to not just a competitive college level athlete, but to someday perhaps swim in the Olympic Games, where the best athletes on planet Earth go and compete in their respective sports. So when you're listening to this episode, or you want to rehash and go back one morning when you get up and you're feeling sorry for yourself, ask yourself how well you're prioritizing your time and how badly you want that thing that it is that you're trying to achieve. So on that note, Roy, I'm going to say thank you so much. We're going to pick this thing right up in part 2. You've been listening to Win Today with your boy, Johnny Martin. Thank you all so much. Thank you to Seven Roads Media and Cloud9 Marketing Group for co-producing the show. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on whatever platform you're on. Without you, I cannot continue to do what I love. You can follow me personally on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Real John C. Martin. I'd love to hear from you, so please reach out with comments and questions after each episode. Your comments push me to get better every day. As always, thank you for your continued support, and don't forget, win today.